Terrence is successful in his fight with Khan at Madison Square Garden on April 20th, we will make a proposal to and Spence defeats Garcia, which I expect. We'll make a proposal to Spence and to Al Heyman for a fight in the fall between Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. That's the fight that I would be most interested.
Don't tease me, Bob. Don't tease me now. Don't tease me, Bob.
Not tease you. I'm not tease you. We're going to do it in the same way that we're making the proposal to Deontay Wilder, to Al Heyman, and to Shelly Fink. We will make a proposal, assuming both fighters win in March and April. We will make a proposal directly to the fighter.
You know, the next chapter in the Crawford versus Errol Spence saga seems a lot to me like the last chapter. The next chapter is that if both of these fighters are successful, both Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, if they're successful in their next matchups, that Bob Arum means to make Errol Spence and his advisor and his team, including all the aforementioned parties in the negotiations, he intends to make Spence a proposal, make him an offer. But I'll tell you that I myself am very skeptical as to whether a proposal is going to make the least bit of difference in terms of progress. And here's why. We know Spence is fighting Mikey Garcia next, but he already seems to have his mind set on someone else after Mikey Garcia.
I mean, that's the fight that I'm looking for, not looking past Mikey at all, but I mean, I'm looking for that Manny Pacquiao fight, pay-per-view. I mean, it makes sense. Maybe we can have it at the AT&T Stadium right after I fight Mikey Garcia.
You heard that shit? That's who he's looking at. That's what he intends to do. That's who he set his sights on. He's looking for a Manny Pacquiao fight right after the Garcia fight. Not Terrence Crawford. So those things in mind, Bob Arum making Errol Spence a proposal after the Mikey Garcia fight, I don't know that that's going to make the least bit of difference. Honestly, I don't think it will. Errol Spence has already showed that he's willing to sit on his hands and wait. How long has he been waiting for Keith Thurman to give him the time of day? How long has he been waiting for Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, those guys that have been on the same side of the street as him for years now? How long has he been waiting for those guys to give him the time of day? Those things in mind, it's conceivable to me that he would also be willing to wait for Manny Pacquiao to give him the time of day. And while he's waiting, while he's sitting on his hands, he's going to be just as dismissive of a Crawford fight as he has been throughout. While Crawford is making it crystal clear that he wants the champions, he's letting it be known. I mean, I don't know what else this guy's got to do to make it crystal clear to the boxing community, the boxing pundits, the boxing fans. He's already made it clear what kind of fights he wants to have in the welterweight division. Whereas Errol Spence, every so often he'll say that he wants to unify this, that, and the other, but he'll make a contradictory statement. Look, a Manny Pacquiao fight might represent a good monetary value. Maybe. Let's not kid ourselves. Errol Spence versus Manny Pacquiao could be a decent-sized pay-per-view. It could. I don't know. Let's see what these Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence numbers look like first before we jump to any conclusions. Because I'll tell you that Manny's numbers with Broner were underwhelming. So let's see if two young guys who are undefeated can do a little better in this market. Let's see. I don't know. But essentially, the logic seems to be that Errol Spence wants to have a big pay-per-view with Manny Pacquiao. And he's not alone in that sentiment. Keith Thurman cannot find the time. This guy cannot find the time of day to give to Errol Spence. He already made it clear he don't plan on fighting him this year. That's out of the question. What he does have time for, however, also is Manny Pacquiao.
What would you like next? If this Manny Pacquiao fight were to come to fruition in 2019, would you take it?
I most likely would definitely take it. I'm going to have to talk to my team. We're going to have to talk to our managers. But I feel good. That was a beautiful fight. I would love to have that. Bring it in the ring. Maybe Brooklyn, maybe Vegas, wherever Manny Pacquiao wants it. I'd fight him in the Philippines if I had to, baby.
So the idea that the PBC may give us a unification fight in 2019, it's not looking like that's going to happen because Keith don't want to fight Errol, and They both want to fight Manny. But Manny ain't got a full version of a title, you understand. Manny don't got a title for them to unify. But they both want him. Yet that's the guy that they both want. And what's funny about that is Manny is circling the drain. I mean, he is approaching the end. Every day, every week, every month, every year that passes, Manny does inch closer to retirement. Those things in mind, while they both might want him, there's no guarantee that they will get him. Ultimately, the final word on a fight like that doesn't rest with Keith Thurman, doesn't rest with Errol Spence, anybody else that's waiting around for a Pacquiao fight. The final word on a fight like that happening rests with Manny Pacquiao and whether or not he wants to give either of you two guys the time of day. We know that he plans on being there for Errol Spence's fight against Mikey Garcia. He plans to be in attendance. So maybe that's why Errol Spence is holding out hope. But I reiterate, whether he's in attendance or he's not in attendance, that doesn't guarantee you a Manny Pacquiao fight. It's up to Manny whether or not he wants to give you the time of day. Now, in Terrence Crawford, you got a young undefeated champion like yourself who is willing to give you the time of day, who's making it crystal clear that you one of the guys that he wants to fight. And what does Errol Spence meet that with? I'll tell you what he meets that with. Excuses, stall tactics, reasons for the fight not to happen now or in the near future. What Errol Spence is doing in regards to Terrence Crawford is not dissimilar from what Keith Thurman has been doing in regards to Errol Spence.
Same shit.
It's the same fucking shit. There's always a reason for that not to be the next fight. You're always looking for some kind of other alternative, some kind of avenue, and what's worse about it is
Fan demand is dissipating.
fan demand, largely in part, creates fights. When the fans really want it, that's when the fights get made. But therein lies a dilemma, because Errol Spence's fans, and many of PBC's fans in general, they don't actually want that fight. They are happy with the substitutes. They are happy watching Errol Spence fight a 135-pound fighter. They're happy with that. Mikey Garcia's last fight was at 135 pounds. From that, he's jumping up to 147. But Errol Spence is his fans are happy with that. So good luck relying on fan demand to get the fight made. When Errol Spence's fans are happy seeing him fight 135-pound fighters waiting around for something to happen, they're happy with that. So fan demand in and of itself may not even help get this fight made. Errol Spence's fans will give you any myriad of excuses as to why it's okay for Errol Spence to do what he's doing. They'll ask you stupid questions like, well,
Why hasn't Bob Arum made him an offer?
what? Well, hold on for a second there, fella. Hold on, little fella. Your guy, Errol Spence, stood in front of a whole thing of media people, in front of a podium, and he told the world that he's the A-side.
I'm A-side. I'm A-side. Like I said, Terry Cobb got to come across the street.
Did you guys forget that already? He stood in front of a podium and told the world that he's the A-side. Well, okay, Mr. A-side, if that's what you are, then shouldn't you be the one making the offers? I mean, that's how this works. If you're the A-side fighter, you're the marquee fighter, you're the A-side, and he's the B-side, then ideally, you're the one that's supposed to be making the offer. Yet when it comes to Errol Spence, it's backwards. He's the A-side, but Bob's got to make him an offer in order for the fight to come off. And I'm left thinking, why is it always
Some dumb shit.
with PBC fighters that these guys swear up and down that they're the best thing for boxing, they're the biggest names, best things in sliced bread, yet they always seem to be waiting on someone else to initiate negotiations. They got A-side attitudes with B-side bank accounts. That's what it seems to be. Because they like to think of themselves as the biggest names in the sport. That's how they talk. That's how they treat negotiations. But they're heavily reliant upon other outfits from other promotional outfits to be the ones to get the ball rolling, to be the ones to finance the offers. Seems to me like you guys really ain't got no A-side fighters. Y'all got A-side attitudes with B-side bank accounts. And these are really, questions and details and particulars that Errol Spence's fans themselves should be asking. That, okay, well, Spence, if you the A-side, shouldn't you be sending Crawford an offer? I mean, you say you ain't got a promoter. People don't tell you what to do. They give you suggestions, and you go with the ones that you like the best. These are all things that Errol Spence said himself. And the screenshots is right up there for you to look at them. Errol Spence says he don't need a promoter, and he is heavily involved in the trajectory of his career, all that shit. All right? Errol Spence, for all intents and purposes, wants people to believe that he's his own boss, that he's gotten his own, destiny or whatever. And if that's true, then that would then have to mean that the only reason that the Crawford fight isn't in the works, isn't even being discussed, is because you don't want to fight him. Because if you did want to fight him, you'd show the same enthusiasm that you show for a Manny Pacquiao fight, for a Mikey Garcia fight, for a Terrence Crawford fight. Remember what Spence said? He was licking his chops at the prospect of a Mikey Garcia fight. Why the fuck you not licking your chops at the prospect of a Terrence Crawford fight? I thought it was strap season. Mikey ain't got no strap for you to win, but Crawford does. Why you not licking your chops? You know, ultimately, these are all talking points that are eerily similar to the talking points I've made in previous videos regarding this subject. And that's why I said that the next chapter in the saga of Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, it looks a lot like the last chapter. That Bob Arum may go ahead and make these guys a proposal, make these guys an offer, but they're probably going to shoot it down. They're probably going to dismiss it so that they can keep sitting on their hands. And their fans, they're going to give them a pass for it. You know, first they'll say, well, why hasn't Bob made him an offer? And then after Bob makes him an offer, they're just going to come up with some excuse to cry about the offer. Like, oh, well, they didn't tie his shoelaces. Or just some moronic shit that Errol Spence's fans say. In other words, they're on board for whatever duckery, whatever fuckery he does. The same way they're on board for any PBC fighter that is culpable of this. So while Bob Arum and Terrence Crawford might really want that fight, because it's a good fight, it's the best fight the welterweight division has to offer. While they might want that fight, that's not enough. It takes two to tango, and Spence didn't bring his dance shoes. In other news, the mandated title defense for WBC heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder has been formally ordered by the WBC. These guys have to make a deal by April 4th. Otherwise, it'll go to a purse bid in Mexico City. The date has been set aside, and this was presumably, predictably,
Wilder's next choice.
the next option for Deontay Wilder since the Tyson Fury fight has fizzled out. A fight that we've been talking about extensively in the days following Tyson Fury's decision to go with Top Rank and ESPN. And this move comes as no surprise to me. I'm sure it's no surprise to you guys either. I mean, Dominic Brazeale, for all intents and purposes, was just a chess piece, a pawn on the board for the WBC and for Deontay Wilder to use at their leisure, at their convenience, whenever they found
use for him and purpose.
reason to, do so, reason to move him. I mean, initially, when they named Dominic Brazeale the mandatory challenger, the way that read to me is they're using him as an obstruction. They're using him to block Dillian White from getting a title shot. And once they got that out of the way, they just left Dominic Brazeale in limbo. They just left him out there. That's why the WBC felt so inclined to actually try to mandate, actually try to order a Tyson Fury rematch.
Scheduling person.
Even though, they already named Dominic Brazeale the mandatory. So ideally, that would have been the order that came first. But no, like all things involving Deontay Wilder and some things involving the WBC, they did it backwards. Ass backwards. So now that they have found use of Dominic Brazeale, he will be getting his title shot. I'll tell you this much. Look, maybe the fight might be interesting because both sides of it, they do have some bad blood with each other. They do have some history. An incident that took place in the lobby post-fight. You guys are aware of all those hairy details.
Grotesqueries.
And maybe that'll inspire Dominic Brazeale to be in rare form. Maybe they can make a fight out of it. But I'll tell you that what really has my attention more than anything is I wonder what Deontay Wilder really stands to make in this fight. I think that is actually more interesting than the matchup itself. Because it's going to be funny as hell trying to watch Wilder's fans justify how he has plummeted, how his purse has plummeted since the Tyson Fury fight. You got a lot of guys that are trying to convince you of a lot of bullshit. A lot of bullshit they convince themselves of.
To talk up Wilder?
You got a lot of guys that don't want to admit that Tyson Fury bailing on Deontay Wilder is a serious and critical hit to Deontay Wilder's plan. His plan to use synergy
to gain leverage.
Use that synergy to gain leverage in an Anthony Joshua fight. Well, that didn't happen. Why? Because you didn't beat Tyson Fury. Quite honestly, a lot of people think that he beat you. You're lucky that they called it a draw. You're lucky that you still have that green belt. But as a result of that decision, guess what? That opened the door for Tyson Fury to leave you high and dry, because your rematch clause only applies in the event that someone wins and someone loses. Well, the draw that allowed you to keep that belt is the same draw that allowed Tyson Fury to abscond and go elsewhere. Now, you're fighting Dominic Brazeale. Maybe the aesthetic of the fight will be interesting, maybe it won't, but I think what a lot of people are really going to be paying attention to is, what does Wilder stand to make for this fight? I mean, he talk a lot of shit, his fans definitely talk a lot of shit. They talk more shit than a little bit. They can't admit it. They cannot simply admit that Deontay Wilder has been hung out to dry.
By Fury.
And he just needs to come back down to earth, that if you're going to participate in any of the bigger situations in your division, then you need to abandon those delusions of grandeur that you've got, come back down to earth, and negotiate a fight on reasonable terms. Because no matter what you want to tell the people in the media, you are not as advertised. I mean, Wilder's the biggest walking, talking contradiction in the entire heavyweight division. He spent all that time talking up the Tyson Fury fight and the rematch, only for him to try to turn around and act like he doesn't need the guy.
Yeah, right.
And Wilder's fans, they ain't no better. They in fact enable his delusions of grandeur, all while putting on display that they're no stranger to contradicting themselves just as much as he does.
Question, dude. I'm trying to see if it was a success, and if so, why would Tyson pull out of the rematch? It had to be money. Ask that question. That's the question. Ask that question. Why don't you skip ahead to that? Asking me how much money they made is a corny ass question. I don't have the answer to that. I don't have an answer to that.
Well, if you don't have the answer to that, and you don't know how much money they made, then why are you claiming that he would have made twice as much money in the rematch when you don't even know what they made in the first fight? Observe.
Guess what? He would have made more money fighting him twice than he did fighting him just once.
And how do you know that? You're the one that just had a little titty attack, little temper tantrum, because you don't know what they made in the first fight. But you're alleging you know what they would have made in the rematch?
They made a bunch of money. Millions of dollars.
How do you know they made a bunch of money?
Millions of
You
dollars.
started off by saying you don't know what Tyson Fury made. You don't know what they made. You started off by saying that. Now, this is Fanon, one of Deontay Wilder's biggest nut huggers. I mean, you see how upset the guy gets when you ask him a question, but it's a fair question. The question that was asked to him was, does he think that a part of the reason that Tyson Fury chose to go to ESPN instead of
Right back into the rematch.
going into the rematch with Wilder is because, well, Tyson Fury probably didn't make much money in the first fight, or at least not as much money as he was being offered to fight on ESPN. And Fanon, like all Deontay Wilder's nut-hugging fans, lost his little mind. Let me look how upset the guy is. But he's gonna have to run and get this guy's heart medication. So like I said, Deontay Wilder himself is a walking, talking contradiction, and it's no coincidence that many of his fans are also walking, talking contradictions. That's what they're good at. That's what they do. Contradict themselves.